welcome to the BullCast podcast. I'm Katie Pickler, and with me today is Court Winsett.
Hello, Katie.
And Cameron Spann.
Hey, guys. How are y'all?
Good God, y'all. What is it good for?
Absolutely nothing. Okay. War in Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Not the Wolf of Wall Street, the war in Wall Street. That's what we're going to talk about today.
And not like gangs of New York, like
Not
on the
gang-
streets
yeah.
of Wall Street.
This is war and Wall Street.
Right.
How do they go together? How do they not go together? What is the impact? And why are we doing this episode? Well, there's a lot of war conversation going on. Now, when this episode comes to you, hopefully there'll be a different story.
I think we have given inside baseball before. We tend to record these a little out to give ourselves plenty of time to get it reviewed by everybody that has to review it. Who knows where we'll be 2 weeks from now when this actually comes out.
This episode, we're going to talk about history. This is going to go back to kind of Katie's history lesson. We're going to talk about different wars. We're going to talk about the impact on Wall Street. We're going to mention a little bit about what's going on right now, but this episode is not going to be specifically talking about what's happening today because, as Court said, we're recording this a couple of weeks before you're going to hear it. And so we do not want to be talking about what's happening today when it could be a totally different story 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, just as an example, again, by the time you're listening to this, there's a little history for you. Today, the market has been going up.
Yeah.
It has been mostly in response to an announcement that President Trump was going to give a speech tonight. The market is reacting to what they hope will be positive news from Trump tonight.
And tomorrow we'll
yeah,
see.
Who knows? We don't know what Trump is going to say yet. So tomorrow it could all be great, or it could all have gone to
And that's,
Hell in a handbasket.
that's an interesting tidbit for our listeners, especially maybe our newer investors, that markets don't respond. Once news happens, they can respond to leading up anticipation.
Excitement,
Yeah.
the anticipation.
Yeah.
They're a little Rocky Horror Picture Show in there. So when war breaks out, the first instinct is panic. But history tells a different story. Today, we're looking at what actually happens, not what headlines suggest. And that's as anything. There's the fake news. Fake news has been going on for a long time. What the headlines portray, what the actual markets do. But headlines can make a difference on markets, as we just said, the anticipation of a speech, and then actually what happens after the event, the speech, the whatever it may be, happens. So disclaimer, before we get into the markets, we want to acknowledge that war is a serious and deeply human topic. Behind every headline are real people, real families, and real sacrifices. Our thoughts are absolutely with everyone impacted during this time. I was just talking to a client earlier this morning, you've got everybody very split. A lot of people are very fatigued right now because they feel like it's been one thing after the other of COVID and then just a lot of different economic issues and now war. And there's some that are just like, I just want to get back to my reality. I want to get to my life. This doesn't impact me. And then you've got a whole other group that it's like, no, this does impact. This is impacting everybody right now. And so that's why we're going to talk about how war events impact the overall market, which then again is impacting every single person. So today's conversation is simply meant to provide historical perspective on how markets have responded in times of war. That said, one way we often try to understand the uncertainty of conflict is through storytelling, especially in film.
Ooh, I see a segue.
The most impactful films about war.
Okay.
You ready?
The first one's the best one.
Daddy's Game.
Dad.
Okay, who's going to start?
You take the first one. It's a great one, yeah.
The first one on the list, actually, Nicole was asking me what my favorite war movie was, and I was like, I'm not really a huge war movie fan, but I guess Saving Private Ryan. And then I see another one on the list that is actually, I like a lot more. But Saving Private Ryan is the first one on the list. It's a World War II story, obviously. It follows a group of soldiers that are searching through France to find a private who is lost in war. The whole premise is a woman has 3 sons. All 3 sons join the army to go to war for World War II. And she's lost 2 of them. So the army sends a group of soldiers led by Tom Hanks into France to try and find Private Ryan so that they can get him out because the army does not want this woman to lose her last son. The opening scene, of course, of Saving Private Ryan is described as one of the most accurate and impactful and, to many people, disturbing battle scenes of any movie ever.
I have not seen this movie because when it first came out, or within the first year or two when it came out, I tried to start it, and at that time I was not emotionally in a place where I could watch that. I was young. It was a very traumatic beginning of that movie. I was like, there's no way I can get through this. I really need to go back as an adult now and watch it because it is such an incredible movie from what I've heard. But that is a way to start a movie.
Well, I will say after the very, very dramatic opening to that movie, the rest is considerably calmer. And so if you were young, you may have had trouble getting through the opening bit, but then you may have had trouble paying attention to the rest of it. That's the first one.
It's on my Mount Rushmore of films, and so is another one on here. I wonder if it's the one that you like more than that movie. Also, if there are little ones in the car, cover their ears. But when I see the title of Saving Private Ryan, I think it was Mad TV sketch when I was younger.
Saving Ryan's Privates.
Shaving Ryan's Privates.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, on to the next list. Okay, a little more somber here. Schindler's List. Directed by Spielberg. The true story of Oskar Schindler, a businessman who saved over 1,000 Jewish lives during the Holocaust. This is a powerful reminder of the human cost of war. Katie, you were talking about that in the intro. And genocide, highlighting both the darkest and most compassionate sides of humanity. I haven't seen it because I don't know if emotionally I'm ready to sit down and watch all of that. It's filmed in black and white, right? But there are pops of color like red. And I know the story behind it is heavy. It's an important film.
I'm kind of the same way. I haven't seen it, and I think it's because it's been talked about so much of like you've got to be in the right mindset to watch it. But I do want to watch it. I feel like I can't call myself a film buff if I haven't seen it.
Yeah, let's sit down and watch it together.
Let's do it. Okay, Platoon. A young soldier's experience of the Vietnam War. So we've touched on World War II. We've got now Vietnam War as he faces mortal conflict and the harsh realities of combat. One of the first major films to present Vietnam from a ground level perspective, highlighting the psychological toll and complexity of modern warfare. I mean, there's tons of movies that really touch on the Vietnam War. Was MASH Vietnam War?
No, MASH was actually Korea.
Korea, that's right.
Did y'all ever see Across the Universe, the Beatles
Yes.
movie? Yeah. But some of the backdrop is the Vietnam War, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, that's what it
One
was.
of the main characters is sent off. All right.
Okay, next is Dunkirk, retelling of the evacuation of Allied soldiers from Dunkirk during World War II. This film emphasizes tension, survival, uncertainty. It shows how fragile situations can be even when the outcome becomes a historic success. I believe that this is the one where, like, I think I've seen this one. They get fishermen and stuff to all pitch in their boats to go and pull the Allies out.
Sir Christopher Nolan directed this, and he can do no wrong.
Yeah, it was a pretty impressive movie. So far, after having told Nicole that I don't really like war movies, we're 4 for 4 on movies that I like.
And we get to go to the next one, which is on my Mount Rushmore films.
100%.
This one is guaranteed to make me cry, and it takes
Love
place
it.
hundreds of years before all the wars we've talked about. This would be Mel Gibson's Braveheart. He directed and starred Freedom! Follows 13th century Scottish warrior Sir William Wallace as he leads the fight for Scottish independence from the naughty Brits.
The last one on this list is 1917. Two soldiers are sent on a dangerous mission during World War I to deliver a message that could save hundreds of lives. And there's so many other great movies that have been centered around war and war impacts, and so many different ones that are really historically accurate to more romantic sides, like Pearl Harbor, but that's much more on the love story side, like Oppenheimer.
I was just about to say, events leading up to or during the war, you know.
And then one Beautiful Mind. Wasn't that centered around war that they were trying to crack codes?
That would be Imitation Game.
Imitation Game, not Beautiful
Good movie.
Mind. Imitation Game.
Yeah, the guy who invented the first computer, really.
Yeah. So there's lots of different stories around what happens during war times. Okay. While these films can't fully capture the reality of war, they do highlight something important: uncertainty, emotion, and rapidly changing conditions. Because this is something that it's just a lot of them portray normal day-to-day life, and then boom, in an instant, things change. So the core pattern: markets hate uncertainty. Say it again. Markets hate uncertainty, not necessarily war itself. So uncertainty, we had it during COVID times. We have it coming elections. Markets like to know, they like to predict what's going to happen. They like to really have a good pulse on things and see patterns, and wars are uncertainty. Once conflict begins, uncertainty turns into clarity. markets often stabilize and recover.
Yes, sometimes.
Sometimes.
We've had
Not always.
We've had situations in the past and possibly currently where we really haven't had a lot of certainty, and that's why we've experienced the market. There are a few things that have been affecting the market lately, not just the war itself, but also how long is it going to last? Why are we doing it? What is the goal? When are we going to accomplish that goal? And it specifically has impacted the Strait of Hormuz and oil being able to get shipped out of oil-producing nations to the rest of the world.
Which then it's the supply chain issues, and it's the rabbit hole from there.
I had never heard of the Strait of Hormuz until this happened, but the past few bullets, David's monthly video, he brought it up, and I'm like, what is this? And sure enough, all over the news.
Yeah.
Again, so much that impacts everybody's day-to-day life, but it's things that you don't know about until there's a reason to bring it up and talk about it.
And markets hate uncertainty because humans hate uncertainty. Nobody likes an uncertain future. And who drives the markets? It's humans.
Yeah.
Everybody's
craving on what can you control and what can't you control. And so it's being in this limbo is hard. Having that clarity, having that uncertainty removed is a huge way to then continue to move forward and know this is what we're dealing with. So key takeaways, the worst market moments tend to happen before or at the start of conflict, not after. So we're just going to take a case study and really go through the different wars and how they've had an impact on the stock market. So for listeners, we have a wonderful chart from Clearnomics called War and the Stock Market. And this will be used for reference. Cam, you want to kind of tell them where it's going to be?
Yeah, once this launches, it'll also be on our website, this chart. And if you go to bullcastpodcast.com, at the very top, you will see a tab called Resources. Just hit that, and you'll be able to download the chart.
So this is going to list the historical events of the S&P 500 price returns for the 1, 5, and 10 years after.
10 years after what?
After the war.
After the start of each war,
Yeah. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to kind of reference to this chart, but obviously we're going to try and paint the picture so you're not having to pull it up to listen to us and follow along. So you want to round robin this?
Sure.
Maybe.
Are we going to round robin it by each war?
By each war.
One of us will take a war?
Yeah, let's take a war.
Okay. Well, do you want to do the first one?
I'll take the first one.
Okay.
World War II. The U.S. entered World War II after Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. The country and the markets were stepping into the unknown. So 1 year later, the markets were essentially flat. And that's where I was actually just talking with Court about that because it's like, wow, it's zero flat, but that's just what it was. Flat, did not change. 5 years later, stocks were significantly up, 65%. And then 10 years later, the market had almost more than doubled at 155% return. So that is just looking at what happened with World War II. Flat to significantly up to then more than doubled.
Some interesting, well, not interesting. It is interesting, but some context for World War II that I will point out is obviously if you didn't know this, you must be very, very young. World War II, we came out of the Great Depression during World War II, largely because despite the uncertainty early on in the war effort sparked massive industrial growth.
Yeah.
Factories ramped up, employment surged, the U.S. economy transformed into a global powerhouse. So we went from absolutely sucking wind to this is when America became America.
A big power machine, which is why it's that first year it was flat because it was really getting everything grooving. The expenses to get this powerhouse going, but then the economic engine that was all of these different booming markets, which then turned into the 5 year at 65% and the 10 year 155%. Move us to our next war.
The Korean War. It began in 1950 when North Korea invaded South Korea, drawing in the U.S. and allied forces in a Cold War-era conflict aimed at stopping the spread of communism. Again, history buffs will know that in the 1950s, we were in the grips of a very, very strong hatred of communism. I mean,
probably a great word.
Yeah, that would be a good word to say.
So a lot of the wars between World War II and today happened because we were fighting communism all over the globe and so forth.
Yeah.
1 year after the war started, the market posted a solid gain of 12%. 5 years later, stocks had more than doubled. So stocks had gone up by 100. The market had gone up by, the S&P, I guess, had gone up by 126% 5 years later. And then 10 years later, the market was up almost 200%.
Wow.
197%. So the period obviously benefited from strong post-World War II economic momentum, but even with the geopolitical tension, the U.S. economy continued to expand and the market followed.
I'm going to discuss the Vietnam War, and before I read some of this, I was looking at this chart. It's the red line at the bottom, and it looks like the war with the least amount of stock market volatility, meaning it didn't dip a lot, but it also didn't rise a lot. It's pretty flat, which is fascinating. So, U.S. involvement in Vietnam escalated significantly in 1965, marking the start of a long, highly controversial, and costly conflict. 1 year later, the market was basically flat. Sure enough, it says 1%. 5 years later, returns were slightly negative 1%. And 10 years later, the market was still modestly below where it started. This is one of the few examples where markets struggled longer term, but it wasn't just the war. The late 60s and 70s brought rising inflation, political unrest, and eventually the oil crisis. Can you believe this was the time of the hippies and we had to deal with all this? It's a reminder that broader economic conditions matter just as much, if not more, than the conflict itself.
Okay, the Gulf War. The Gulf War began in 1991 after Iraq invaded Kuwait, prompting a swift U.S.-led coalition response. 1 year later, the market has rebounded strongly. And with this, it was up 28%. 5 years later, stocks were up significantly, 88%. 10 years later, the market had more than tripled. We went from 88% at 5 years to 321% 10 years later. This was a relatively short and decisive conflict. Markets initially reacted to uncertainty around oil supply and global stability. Here we go with oil again. But once the outcome became clear, again, uncertainty, we had clarity. Confidence returned quickly, setting the stage for the strong economic expansion of the 1990s.
1991, I was a senior in high school. And so the big thing that was talked about a lot around my school, and I think probably a lot of other guys that were my age, was this was the first time that we had lived through a war. Like everybody in my class had been born just after Vietnam had ended.
Okay.
There had been military incursions that had happened during our lifetime, but this was the first time that a war happened. And everybody that was around my age was like, oh, are they going to put the draft back in place? I mean, like I registered for the draft when I turned 18, and it was an interesting time. I was like, am I gonna be like a Marine or am I going to go to college? I had no idea. I legit, it was interesting given that it was the first war that I had lived through. So I bet a lot of people there's been a lot of talk about.
I mean, a lot of people are talking about is the draft coming back.
Yeah, is the draft, like anytime we do something like this, is the draft coming back? Are they going to put boots on the ground? Blah, blah, blah. The last war we will talk about in terms of market and the effect on the market because we have full knowledge of how it affected the market. The war in Afghanistan, it began in late 2001. Following September 11th attacks as the U.S. targeted terrorist networks and the Taliban. 1 year later, the market was down sharply. It was down 24%. 5 years later, stocks had recovered into positive territory. It was back up 19%. And then 10 years later, it was up 21%. Still positive, but obviously a much more muted reaction to war than the Gulf War, the Korean War, or World War II. Interestingly, this conflict began near a market bottom following the early 2000s downturn. As uncertainty cleared and the economic conditions improved, markets rallied strongly in the years that followed. What happened in 2001 happened to one of the world's financial centers. So you think about the terrorist attack that happened on 9/11. Mm-hmm. That all happened, first of all, they flew planes into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
But you can imagine the financial impact, the impact that those attacks had on markets everywhere because it happened in New York. They hit a financial nerve, so to speak. There was massive financial impact before we ever actually went to war. And then shortly thereafter, we declared war on terrorism and went to go root out, the Taliban and so forth. But again, different scenarios while the war is happening, that can all impact the way the markets are going to react. They're not just reacting to the war, they're reacting to where they were beforehand. When we were talking about the momentum of World War II that the market was able to respond off of in Korea. There was actually, the market was kind of slowing down after World War II because we had built up all of this.
That's such a big boom.
Yeah, we had built up all of this industry to support the war effort. And then the war ended and everybody came back home and there weren't as many jobs for everybody. So there was a little bit of, downturn in the market. And it's almost like Korea brought us back out of that downturn, whereas things obviously were very different. 10 years later, after the Gulf War started in 1991, Afghanistan happened 10 years later.
That's wild.
These things are just, it's an interesting study.
It's a very interesting study. And like looking at this chart, then we have this all layered on top of each other. But then if you put it as a timetable of starting from each of these wars and showing how, the market's ebbs and flows with, each war going up and then dropping, leveling back off again and then going back up again. Reminds me, there is a fund that has this great product that they put out. It doesn't matter what the mutual fund is, but what it matters is this chart, and it shows back from the 1930s, 1940s, all the way to today, and how there are almost every single year a reason not to invest. It's war, it's housing bubbles, it's all these different conflicts and reasons why you should not invest. But it shows the power of if somebody had invested, $1,000 back at this time when it all started and stayed in and did not panic when World War I, World War II, Korean War, all of these different options, and they just stayed put, that over time their money still was building and growing, and they had a nice nest egg if they had still held on to it that whole time. Because every single day there is a reason not to invest. There's going to be, which way is the wind turning? Where are we going? And so that's where it's a power of knowing how war or how any kind of conflict, any kind of economic impact can affect this overall stock market, but knowing how it fits within your lifestyle and what the impact is going to be towards you personally. Because you can be scared and be like, I don't want to invest right now because there's a war. Well, there's always going to be something going on, as we clearly see here. You were saying the first war that you experienced. Well, that was, Cam and I were babies, but that's the first. We've all experienced the same amount of wars because even though our age difference, we're still experiencing the same.
What's fascinating, kind of a side note, we were walking through each of those wars, and I don't know a lot about the Korean War. And I was thinking through that. There's popularity among wars, just kind of like in the overall culture of America. Like World War II is even to or even greater than the Revolutionary War as far as popularity. Yeah. I'm sure there are way more movies on it, and it may be because it was more intricate. There was a lot more logistics into storming Normandy, but that's just kind of fascinating. The more studied wars or the more fascinating wars. Yeah.
People tend to like...
It's kind of a weird thing.
It's kind of a weird way to say it, but people tend to like the wars that we win, that there is a very clear outcome and that we won. They tend to not like the wars that end in détente or end with a loss. Certainly, they wouldn't like that at all. But, World War II, there was a clear victory. There was a treaty. There was
lots of stuff around Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So key lessons, market prices in fear early. We look at market prices. There's going to be a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. Just as we talked about today as we're recording this episode, obviously you're hearing it a couple weeks later. There is lots of movement just on the anticipation of a speech. At other times there's the fear that's going to this. So market prices decline often before or at the start of a potential war. Once the war begins, uncertainty typically decreases. But as we talked about, if there's uncertainty, if there's not, who are we really fighting? What are we doing? What is this? Is this a one-off or is this a full-blown boots on the ground? Where are we going with this? Economic context versus war itself. Vietnam equals poor returns, inflation, policy issues. Gulf War, strong returns, healthy economy. Long-term investors are rewarded. Most 5 and 10-year returns are strongly positive. And if you look at this across the board, the way the story was laid out with these different wars on this chart, the 5-year and the 10-year are drastically different from that year one. The only one that really was going the opposite direction was Vietnam War, as we talked about that.
And that was a quagmire. People didn't like it. They wanted out. They wanted us to get out. I do just want to point out real quick, because I know somebody will notice, and his name may or may not begin with a D. We did leave out a war. We didn't talk about 2003, the war in Iraq. And of course, that was George W. Bush coming back and finishing what George H.W. Bush started 10 years earlier. We didn't talk about that one. We do have some numbers on the war in Iraq. Starting in March of 2003, year 1 was 31% up. Year 5 was 52% up. And year 10 was 55% up. So that, again, was another war where that 5 and 10 year, you did see some positive impact on the market.
And that's what, give it some time. And then this war we're in right now is going to show up on this. So volatility, long-term loss, you got to weigh the options with this of the short-term dips are common, but rarely permanent. And that is, we've said it again, we've said it multiple times, whether it's COVID, whether it's war, whether it's, economic downturns, for housing bubbles, tech bubble, whatever it could be, it is not panicking. It's going back to the great marketing piece that was put together of how to survive a bear attack, that the first thing you do is just be calm, don't panic, assess the situation, and determine what you need to do and what does this money need to for the long haul. This is my caveat reminder to people. When you are investing, you need to make sure that you do not invest money inappropriately. Meaning, if you know you need that money to pay your mortgage, to pay bills, to things like that, do not have it at risk. Do not have it invested. If you know that it's a long term, then you can withstand to sit back, not watch the roller coaster that is going on with a war or things like that. And you know that long term it's going to be okay. You're going to have those 5-10 year returns. But if it is a short term thing, that's not something that needs to have a lot of risk at any time, because you never know when a war is going to happen, when something's going to happen.
History doesn't say ignore risk. History just tells us don't panic.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be mindful of the risk that you're taking on, but you don't need to panic.
You looked up another war?
Because I have a problem. I was curious about the Spanish-American War, how the stock market reacted. And it just says there was a positive market sentiment. The market generally perceived the war as a catalyst for economic growth. So there you go.
I mean, that's interesting, because obviously we're basing on who are we at the start of a war, and then who are we by the end of it. And so the prime example with the World War II, depression, boom, there you go, versus some of these other ones, like, were we in a great state when we started?
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, there's the closing bell. You've made it to the end of yet another episode of the BullCast podcast. If you liked what you heard and you'd like to hear more, please feel free to go to your favorite subscription service and sign up to have our podcast delivered directly to your device every single Thursday at noon. If you'd like to find out more about Cortland, Katie, Cameron, or Nicole, please feel free to go to our website. That website is bullcastpodcast.com. We've got pictures up there. We've got bios. We've got chart that we referred to today. And we've got a place where you can drop a comment or suggest a topic you'd like to hear us talk more about. But hey, I mentioned pictures. We do have an Instagram handle. That Instagram handle is @BullCastPodcast. We also have an X handle, which is also @BullCastPodcast. And rounding out the social media, we have a Facebook page, which is BullCast the Podcast. So feel free to check us out there. As I do on every episode, let me remind you that Katie, Cameron, Nicole, and I all work at a place called Pickler Wealth Advisors. And if you'd like to find out even more information about us, or find out about what we do, find out about what we could potentially do for you, find out about our amazing team, and find out about our boss, David Pickler, please feel free to go to that website. That website is picklerwealthadvisors.com.
That's advisors with an O.
Not an E.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have given you enough. Thank you to our brave men and women serving our country right now.
Yes.
So for now, I'm Court.
I'm Katie.
I'm Cam.
And we're done.